Okay, so let's just jump right in. Picture this. You're sitting on a jury. You've got one of the biggest responsibilities a person can have, deciding if someone is guilty or innocent. You'd want every single piece of information, right? The whole story. Well, what if I told you that our entire legal system is actually designed to deliberately hide some of the most, crucial seeming evidence from you? It sounds completely backward, doesn't it? I mean, the whole point of a trial is to get to the truth. So why in the world would a court intentionally keep parts of that truth away from the very people who need it most? It's a real puzzle, and it gets right to the heart of what we believe a fair trial even is. And this isn't just some abstract idea. Let's look at a real-world example. The sexual assault trial of musician Jacob Hoggard. As Global News reported, it was only after the jury left to make their decision that the public found out about a whole list of explosive facts that were kept completely secret during the trial. And wow, what a list it was. Get this, the jury had no idea that Hoggard had already been convicted of a different sexual assault. They didn't know he was in the middle of serving a 5-year prison sentence for it. They couldn't know that every single day he was brought to court from prison and had to change out of his prison jumpsuit and into a suit right before walking into the courtroom. There was even a moment of sheer panic when they thought a juror might have caught a glimpse of him in shackles. So you have to ask, why on earth would a court hide all of that? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple, and it's not some kind of conspiracy to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. It's a rule book, a very carefully designed set of procedures that every single judge and lawyer has to live by. So meet the official gatekeeper of pretty much every American courtroom, the Federal Rules of Evidence. These rules, first put into law back in 1975, basically spell out, in black and white, exactly what a jury can and cannot hear. This is the answer to our mystery. So where did this thing even come from? Well, before the 70s, the laws on evidence were just a huge, tangled mess of different court decisions. So in 1965, a committee was set up to create one single unified code. But here's a really fascinating bit of history. The whole project got held up for years by Congress. Why? Because of the Watergate scandal. Lawmakers suddenly became obsessed with the rules around privilege, what kind of information a president or their lawyer could keep secret. And that whole debate pushed everything back until 1975. Okay, so if we crack open this rule book, what's the big idea inside? What's the guiding principle? Well, it all really boils down to one fundamental conflict that judges have to deal with every single day: the search for the truth versus the danger of unfair prejudice. And the single most important rule that deals with this is Rule 403. It's often just called the balancing test, and here's what it says. A judge can throw out a piece of evidence, even if it's technically relevant, if its probative value, which is just a fancy way of saying its ability to prove a fact, is massively outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. Let's break that down, because it's super important. So on one side of a scale, a judge is weighing the probative value. How much does this evidence actually help prove something important about this specific case? And on the other side, they're weighing unfair prejudice. How likely is this evidence to just tick off the jury, to get them all emotional and make them want to punish the guy for being a bad person instead of actually deciding the case based on the facts? And this image of the scales of justice really sums it up perfectly. The whole system is trying to make sure the jury is weighing the evidence for this crime, right here, right now, not making a sweeping judgment on the defendant's entire life or their past mistakes or their general character. So the big question is, how does this actually work in a real trial? All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty and see how this plays out. Using one of the most common and frankly most controversial types of evidence, a defendant's prior bad acts. This is all covered by another rule, 404B, and the basic idea is pretty simple. You can't bring up someone's past crimes just to argue that they have a criminal character, and therefore they probably committed this crime too. That's called a propensity argument, the idea that they have a propensity to commit crimes, and it is almost always banned. This example with the DUI really shows you the fine line the judge has to walk. So a prosecutor can't say, hey jury, he got a DUI 5 years ago, so he was probably driving drunk this time too. See, that's using a past act to prove his character and his current guilt. That is a no-go. But let's say the defendant gets on the stand and claims, I had no idea that driving after 3 beers was illegal. Well, now the prosecutor can bring up that prior DUI and say, actually, your prior arrest proves you absolutely did know it was a crime. The evidence isn't about his character anymore, it's about proving his knowledge. And that brings us right back to where we started, with the Jacob Hoggard trial. This is the exact reason the jury couldn't hear about his prior sexual assault conviction. It was to prevent that forbidden line of thinking. Well, if he did it before, he must have done it again. The judge decided that the prejudice from hearing that information would be so powerful, it would completely outweigh its value in proving the specific facts of this new case. So, when you step back and look at the big picture, what's the grand purpose of all these rules that, at first, seem like they're just hiding the truth? It's all about one single goal: a fair trial. At the end of the day, the rules of evidence are there to make sure trials are decided on solid, reliable information that's directly connected to the case. They stop lawyers from ambushing each other with surprise evidence. They keep things moving by cutting out repetitive or confusing stuff. But the most important job they have is to reinforce that core idea. You are on trial for this specific charge, and you have to be judged on the evidence for that charge alone. And don't think this is just some obscure thing that only happens in federal court. No way. The federal rules have been so influential that over 40 states have either adopted them completely or modeled their own evidence codes right on top of them. This is the blueprint for how most courtrooms in America work. So the takeaway here is that these rules don't exist to hide the truth. They exist to protect the integrity of the process we use to find the truth. The theory is that a verdict based on a narrow, focused set of reliable facts is way more just than a verdict that comes from a flood of emotional, prejudicial, and maybe even misleading information. Which, of course, leaves us with a massive question that's right at the heart of our entire justice system. Does filtering evidence like this really protect fairness by keeping the jury focused? Or does it stop jurors from seeing the whole person and, because of that, maybe the whole truth? It's definitely something to think about.